Tonight we are going to talk about the secondary schools in Amsterdam. So it's very specific to Amsterdam because it's really different compared to the rest of the country. If you live not in Amsterdam, then it will not be very useful for you. So just so you know. In the Eventbrite page, I saw that you all live in Amsterdam or close by, so your children can go to school in Amsterdam. So that's fine. I already said it before, so in the chat you can ask questions. In between things, I will go and answer them. At the end, we also have a Q&A if you have any more questions. I will also send you the recording, thanks to John, and the presentation slides as well, so that you are very well aware of what your next steps are and what we have talked about here. So first, I'll tell a little bit about UTNL. I started my business in 2013, so that's more than 11 years ago. I help international families find a school for their children. I also write articles about the Dutch education system. I give webinars like these, and I have some corporate clients whose children I help to find a school. So it's a lot of different things. Also international school, but tonight it's only the Dutch secondary schools in Amsterdam. I am Dutch, my husband is American, and we have two children who are now just a bit older compared to this picture that we took in Philadelphia when we were visiting the grandparents. They are now both in a secondary school, so by now I've seen a lot of schools, I know a lot about it, and I'm happy to share that with you. So this is the agenda for tonight. First, I'll talk about the timeline, so what's happening in Group 8, then about the Amsterdam Lottery. I'll explain very briefly the different abbreviations, the different levels of secondary education. In November, I gave a webinar where we discussed this more in detail. I will also send you the link. If you want to know more about all this, you can check the November webinar. Then I'll tell a little bit about the professions that you can get with each level. And then we zoom into the schools that are in Amsterdam, specifically the similarities and the differences between them. What to look for when you're considering a school. At the end, you can ask your questions. So this is the timeline. So when your child is in Group 8, you have already gone through most of this. When your child is still in Group 7, then you know what's coming next year. So usually in November, all the schools present themselves at the Scholenarena. In the past 2 years, that was organized in the Kromhouthal in Amsterdam North. And there, every school has a booth and they can just show what they do and you can ask questions. So that is a very nice occasion just to get an overall idea of all the schools. And maybe you discover some schools that you didn't know of before, or maybe some schools that you really liked before. After talking to them, you're like, nah, that's not what I expected. So if your child is still in Group 7, then I definitely recommend to visit the Scholenarena next year. From January to March, the open days are organized. The open day is usually the only occasion that you can visit the school in person. So private visits are not possible usually. The open day, they all present themselves. You can ask questions. You can walk through the schools. At the Scholenarena, you don't feel the school. You cannot really see them in action. So it's definitely a good idea to visit the schools at the open day. Keep in mind, it's also a marketing event and they present themselves in the best way. So yeah, you will not get all the information about the school probably, but it definitely gives a good impression. And usually the principal gives a presentation and tells a bit the overall story. And then you can walk around the classrooms and ask questions to the subject teachers. Often some of the students, they give a tour and you can ask them a lot of questions as well. And then there's also what they call lesjesmiddag, and that is a trial class. That's only for the children, so not for the parents. And then they usually teach 2 or 3 different subjects in maybe 1.5 hours, just to give the children a taste of what is it like to follow a class at this school. And especially if your child is interested in gymnasium, they most likely did not have Latin and ancient Greek before. And then at the lesjesmiddag, they can get a trial class for Latin, and they can just get a feel of, would it be a good idea to choose gymnasium or not? Those are the lesjesmiddag. You really have to sign up, and usually they fill up quickly. So make sure you arranged all that in time. Some schools, they around May or June, they have a lesjesmiddag, so a trial class for group 7 students. So if your child is still in group 7, that might be a good idea to get started that way. Then just 1 or 2 weeks ago, your child most likely got the preliminary advice, or the voorlopig advies in Dutch. So that is the advice from the teacher. Later on, I'll explain what the teacher bases that advice on for parents of group 7 children. And in this period, most likely last week, or some schools still this week, they take the transition test. The final advice will come before the 24th of March, so that will still take a bit over a month. And if the final advice, that is based on the teacher's advice and the test results of the transition test. And if the test results are higher than the teacher's advice, then the final advice will be upgraded. If the test results are lower, then the teacher's advice will stay. So it's always in the advantage of the teacher. And then you will get your final advice, and that is what you need to apply for secondary school. They've changed a lot of things in the past year, so if you've heard old stories, then they are usually not applicable anymore today, because since 2 years now there is a national application period, and for all the schools in the whole country, the application period is the 25th to the 31st of March. Sometimes there's a few days before that it already opens, but the deadline is the 31st of March. It does not matter when you apply. It has to be within this period, but you have no single advantage if you apply immediately on the 25th. So don't stress about this. This is really something you need to do very carefully. The application takes place online. Every city has a different procedure, so I'll show you the Amsterdam procedure in a minute. And then in Amsterdam on April 10 at 3:30, you will get the outcome of the lottery. And that means that you will have to log in to the portal, and there you will see the school where your child has been placed. And if that's not a first school of preference, then you will also get to see the position on the waiting list for the other schools that were higher on your list. And you will also see your lottery number. And how that works with the lottery number, I'll explain here. So this is only for Amsterdam. I keep on repeating that because some people think it's a Dutch thing, or so, but it was very different when my mother-in-law told me about it. Yeah, it was different. This is how it works now. So if your child is in group 8, then you will receive an email from ELK. And that is the portal. And that email is very important. So the sender will be no reply at ELK Adam, so Amsterdam.nl. And that will contain your login details. I don't know exactly when they will send it, but it has to be before the 25th of March. If you didn't get it, you should tell the primary school of your children about it, so they can see where it went wrong. And also look in your spam folder. This email is very important, so you need to have it, otherwise you cannot apply. There is a YouTube video, I put a link here, and it is in Dutch, but it explains all the steps of the form and what you have to do. It can be helpful if you are still in doubt. Then you apply online, so it's not on paper anymore like it used to be. And based on the advice, so the final advice of your child, you will get to see the list of schools where you can apply for. So if they get a VMBO advice, you will not be able to see the schools that offer only HAVO or VWO. So they already make a shift, so it's not overwhelming. You cannot pick the wrong school. And how many schools you have to put on your list depends on the advice. So for HAVO and VWO, it used to be 12, but this is the first year that you need to rank 9 schools. You rank them in order of your preference. So your most preferred schools comes at number 1, and then the second school at number 2, and so on. This order is very important. So put the number 1 school at number 1. For VMBO-g and T, you have to put 6 schools, and VMBO-b and K, you have to put 4 schools. What all those types mean, I'll tell you later. Every child gets a random lottery number. That is really random. They make no difference in where you live, which school your child has attended, the test score. That's all irrelevant. It's completely random. There's a notary that sits next to the OSFO organization that carries out the lottery. So you cannot influence that. There's no one who gets preference or whatsoever. Only when you log into the portal to see the outcome of the lottery, you will also see the lottery number. So you don't see the number before making your list. Everyone has placement guarantee, and this means that you will get a place at one of the schools on your list. So someone asked, but what happens if none of the schools have a place? That doesn't happen because everyone gets a place. So for HAVO and VWO, it's one of the 9 schools that you put on your list. And for VMBO, it's one of the 6 or the 4 schools. So pick them carefully. And there's no priority anymore for children who have attended Dalton, Montessori, Waldorf primary school. Last year was the first year there was no priority anymore. So everyone has the same chances of getting a place at those schools. So every year there's over 7,000 children who take part. And this lottery computer allocates randomly the lottery numbers. And then there's, of course, one child who's lucky to get number 1. Now, all the schools still have a place at that moment, so they get placed at the number 1 school. And then maybe after number 2000, there's a student whose number 1 school is full. And at that moment, they look at number 2. And if number 2 is full, they look at number 3, and so on. So they don't look at your number 9 if the number 2 school already has a place. So that's why the ranking is very important. So only when the higher schools on the list are full, you will get a place at a school that's lower on the list. And some schools you can list twice on your list. So for example, St. Nicholas, they have bilingual, a TTO department. VWO, they have Sports Plus class, and they have the regular department. So they have 3 departments, but you can only pick 2 on your list. And but if you do that, you have to put a 10th school, because you can only put the name of each school once. So you can pick 2 programs of the same school, but then you have to add a unique school name. The same applies, for example, for Metis Montessori. They have Coder class, they have Kunst & Co, and they have Technasium. So you can put 2 of them on your list, but then you need an additional school as well. So all of this happens behind the scenes, and then at the 10th of April at 3:30, you can log in and then you can get to see the outcome. Last year, my younger son was applying for the lottery, and as a parent, I already got an email from the school where he had been placed before we logged in at the portal. And I tried not to look at it, but it was very difficult. I wasn't sure what it meant, but keep that in mind. If you want to discover the school together with your child, then don't look at your email and just log in together at the same time at the portal. Or if you want to make sure that there's no disappointment, maybe you can check your email before that, but that's up to you, of course. So this is in short how the lottery works. It is pretty straightforward. You cannot submit a form if you have not selected enough schools. So after 8 schools, it doesn't let you confirm. You have to put a 9th school. It also counts down, so it says you need still 3 schools, 2 schools, 1 school, and then you're done. Make sure to confirm, so press the button. Apparently last year someone forgot to press the button and their child didn't take part in the lottery at all. And you will get an email to confirm all the schools that you've put on your list. After you have confirmed, you cannot change it anymore. So you really have to be sure that that's your final list. So reserve some time, make sure you're not distracted and fill it out, and make sure you do it right the first time. Maybe you've heard about the second lottery round. There is indeed a second round a few weeks after the first round. You can take part in the second round if you want, but you will only find schools there that still have a place after the first round. So it will probably not be your favorite schools, because otherwise they would have been on your list already. Don't count on the second round unless you really have changed your mind. That can happen sometimes, or some children who have missed the first round for whatever reason, they can take part in the second round. But then you give up the school where you got a place and you cannot get it back anymore. So be very sure that's what you want. So you can still change schools after the lottery, but it will only be the leftover schools. So last year, these were the results, but I have to tell you, last year there were 12 schools, and they had what they called improvement of the tail. That meant that children who got initially placed at school number 10 to 12, that they tried to put them higher on the list by creating more spots at the school. Now it's only 9, it's still a lot, but not 12 anymore. So that means there's no improvement of the tail anymore. And what the influence will be of this change to 9 schools, no one knows. So last year, 7,676 children took part in the lottery. There are enough spots. So there were over 9,700 spots available at 62 schools. So there are spots. It's not that there's a lack of places, but the problem is there are some popular schools and they always have a shortage, and there's some other schools and they have still 100 seats available. So it's just not divided equally. That is the problem. What happens this year, it could be that popular schools will get even more popular, or maybe some people are trying to avoid risks and put a less popular school at number 1, so they are pretty sure they will get in. I really don't know what will happen. It will be very exciting. The algorithm behind the lottery is based on placing as many children in the top 3 as possible. Last year, a bit over 76% got a place at the number 1 school and 91.9% in the top 3. So that is pretty good, but a bit below 1% got a place at number 9 to 12, and then you are not happy, of course. So for most children, it goes well, but you have no influence over which school you will get in the end. So in past years, the most oversubscribed schools were Sint Nicolaas, Comenius, Metis, especially the Technasium department, Spinoza Lyceum, Barlees Gymnasium, and Fons Vitae. For this year, probably some of them will reappear in the top, but sometimes some schools suddenly are popular, others drop. It's very unpredictable how that works. So don't look at this too much, but know if you put a school like St. Nicolaas at number 2, it's not very likely that your child will get a place there. So that's a bit how you can make the list. And there are some schools that in the previous years always had a place, so it's very likely that will happen again this year. So if you put them at number 1, you're pretty sure you will get a place. But you never know what happens. So don't put any schools on your list that you really don't like, because there's always a chance you will get at that school, always. So try and find 9 schools or 6 or 4 that you really like and rank them in order of your preference. There's also no neighborhood priority, no sibling priority. So everyone has equal chance. I always say it's equally unfair for everyone because it just causes a lot of stress and anxiety sometimes. I hope that is clear about the lottery. Let me know if you still have questions about that. We'll now talk a bit more about the teacher's advice, so the recommendation. The teacher looks at the test scores of group 6 to group 8. That's mainly for Dutch language and math, so comprehensive reading, spelling, grammar, and so everything together. But they don't only look at the test scores, they also look at the child's interest and their intelligence, their motivation, their study skills, their eagerness to learn, their ambitions. So they try and look at the whole child over a longer period of time. So it's important that your child arrives in time every day, that they did their homework if they had any, that they ask questions in class. When the teacher asks something, that they do what they've been asked, to show that they are serious, that they want to learn. So that's all those things that the teacher looks at. So it is at a longer period of time, but it's pretty subjective still, of course. And that is why the transition test is there. It's not an exam, it's a test. And it's more like a sort of second opinion to confirm the teacher advice. It's very common that the teacher gives a double advice, so they can say, okay, it's more than HAVO, but not yet VWO, but you definitely get a chance of getting there eventually. So I give you double advice, so HAVO/VWO. Since last year, they changed the transition test, and also there the outcome is, at least last year, the only single advice was VWO, and for the rest, it was all double advices to give the children extra chances of doing well and get a high advice. But there was a lot of discussion about that last year, and a lot of children scored higher in the test than the teacher's advice, and it was a bit of a mess. I have no idea how it went this year, so they still have to analyze the results. But it is pretty likely that your child will get a double advice, and then that means that they still have time to develop and see what works best for them. But there's also a lot of confusion about that. It really depends on the secondary school how they create their first year classes. So the overall name of first year is brugklas, and then you have some mixed level brugklas, and brugklas means bridge class. So I know some international parents assume that brugklas always means that it is combined levels, but that is not the case. So please remember that well. You have to ask every school separately, with this specific advice of my child, in which class would they be placed at your school? And the school decides, not the parents. So on the lottery list, some schools, they offer the option to start in a class at a higher level. So if you have HAVO/VWO advice, the schools may ask, okay, in case we make a VWO class to give a chance to the children with double advice, would you like to be placed in the class at a higher advice or at a lower advice? And then you can choose. But if they don't ask that, then the schools decide. Sometimes it depends on how many children applied with which advice, that they try to make even classes. Sometimes it's already fixed and they just put everyone in who applied. Some schools, they have a combined mixed level class also for the second year, or even for the third year. So that's really different per school. So also at the standalone gymnasium school, they have a brugklas, but that's only gymnasium, so it's not combined level. And some schools, they have a VMBO-t/HAVO class, a separate HAVO class, and then a HAVO/VWO class. And then they look at the teacher's advice on which class will they be placed best. Also important to know that children who have lived less than 4 years in the Netherlands, they are not obliged to take the transition test. They may to show what they're capable of, but if their Dutch is not good enough, it doesn't make sense to test them of their Dutch skills. And in that case, the teacher will look at all the above mentioned criteria and then give an advice. That's more fair to those children. You should also know that with a diploma for one level, your child may move on to the next level. So they're not forever stuck at the level of their advies. It often takes 1 more year. So VMBO, I'll show you later, takes 4 years. And then you can go to the 4th year of HAVO, do the 5th year, and then you can move to University of Applied Sciences or go to VMBO. So there's a lot of different ways. So really depending on what the child is capable of, what they're interested in, what they want to study later, what they want to become later. And you can always change at some point or another. This advice tells you about the door through which your child will enter the secondary school, but it will not tell you through which door they will finish the school after 4, 5, or 6 years or longer. So it's just where they start. So that's very important to know that. If you feel that your child is still developing, or maybe they started to learn Dutch at a later stage, I would really advise to pick a school that has this combined level bridge class so they can have more time to really develop to their true potential. But there's other ways to get there as well if they want. So here you see how this all works, and it looks pretty complicated. So VMBO is a vocational school, and that takes 4 years. After that, the students can go to MBO, which is training for a specific profession. I'll show you in the next slide which professions. And after VMBO, they can also go to HAVO, that's more generic education. After HAVO, you can go to HBO, which is University of Applied Sciences. In a lot of countries, this is just called university, but we have 2 types. So this is University of Applied Sciences, and this is Research University. And there are some differences, but also a lot of similarities. So at HBO, you can take your bachelor and then move to Research University for your master's degree. More and more HBO studies also offer a master. So it really depends on what your child wants and how they want to continue with their studies. VMBO is pre-university education that is more academic, and that leads to Research University, but there's also a lot of students who want to do something a bit more practical or applied knowledge, and then from VMBO they move to HBO. So that option is still there as well. In general, the Dutch population is pretty highly educated, so more than the OECD average. So that is the average of a lot of countries in the whole world. And it's not perfect, but in general, it works well. And the idea is that everyone finishes school with a diploma with which they can do a good profession, that they are qualified for that profession, and that they all perform at their level, that they can experience success, that they're not always the worst of the class and always looking up to other kids who are always better at something, because that can be very demotivating. It is the most limiting factor, in my opinion, is that you have to take all your subjects at the same level. Some schools are a bit more flexible, that you can take some subjects at a higher level, or you can already take your final exams 1 year prior to the official exam period. That is nice, but in general, once you're in a stream, you have to finish it before you can move on. And that doesn't work very well for everyone, but that's how the system is based. So you stay from 12 to the end of your stream at the same school. So there's no middle school, there's no junior and senior high. It's just primary and then secondary. So that's also different from other countries. I've made a video in which I explain all those acronyms. I'm not going to show it now, but I've put in the link so you can watch it later if you want. I'll go through this a bit more quickly. So like I said before, in the November webinar, we talked about this more in detail, but just so you know, to freshen up your memory, because it is important information. So VMBO stands for Preparatory Secondary Vocational Education. It takes 4 years and it prepares for MBO education, which is Senior Secondary Vocational Education. And the students have to graduate in a minimum of 6 subjects for their final exam. And after the second year, they have to choose what they call a leerweg type of training. There are some VMBO schools that offer all the 4 levels. There's also, especially when they also have HAVO and VMBO, that they only offer VMBO-t, so that's the theoretical stream within VMBO. So it really depends on the school how they combine the different types of training. And the mixed training, so VMBO-g, that's spaced out a little bit, so you don't get that a lot as advice anymore, has become more the theoretical. After, when they've completed VMBO-t and G, the students may move on to the 4th year of HAVO. And so if your child is interested in that, then they can already prepare for HAVO. There's no minimum grade anymore that the students need to have to move on to HAVO. So they just need to have a diploma and then they can move on. And it's nice when they can stay at the same school. So when they offer multiple levels, then transition is easy. But if they want to, then they can also move schools to go to HAVO or another level. Apart from those different streams, they also have to choose a learning track. And there in VMBO-t, there's 4 types. So you have technical, agriculture, economics, and care and welfare. And then you get subjects that match your profile. So this is after the second year. So that's more specialization. And then for MBO, the next step in their education, they usually continue. So this prepares for the final profession. All students are obliged to go to school until age 16, but they need to have a diploma for at least HAVO, VWO, or MBO level 2. So there's also different levels in MBO. So with VMBO, you are not prepared for the job market yet, so you're still obliged to go to school. But they often combine a few days of schools with a few days of work. So they have internships, so they get a lot of practical experience. And once they graduate, they're very well equipped for the job market. Students who have other type of VMBO, so K or B, they can choose between 10 profiles. So that's a bit more difficult to choose. HAVO is more general education. It takes 5 years. And after the 3rd year, they have to choose one of 4 profiles. So you have culture and society, economics and society, science and health, and science and technology. So up to the 3rd year, they all have the same subjects, which those subjects are, I'll show you a bit later. So my older son is in the 3rd year now, and after the spring break, he has to submit his profile choice. And then you get certain subjects that match your profile. You have some room for additional subjects. And what he is really looking forward to, you can also drop some subjects that you don't need to bother with anymore. So now he still has about 14 subjects, so the 3rd year is pretty tough. And the universities or the HBO studies, some of them require a specific profile. So in the 3rd year, it's good to understand, okay, what are my child's interests? What studies would they need to do? Do those universities require a certain profile or not? Most don't, but it really depends on what you want to study. And then further education, they mostly look at the diploma. There are some studies that are oversubscribed, and then they have additional criteria, so maybe interview or portfolio, or you have to take a test. But for the other universities and other study courses, a diploma is enough. So they don't care about grade. They don't care about the name of the secondary school. They don't care about which subjects you have graduated in. They just look at, do you have a diploma? Yes, okay, you can enter. So no entrance exam, nothing. So that is much easier compared to a lot of other countries. For HAVO, you need to take 7 exam subjects. So for VMBO, 6. So for students who are interested in going from VMBO to HAVO, they really have to keep in mind that they will need to choose an additional subject. So sometimes they can already take their VMBO exam in a 7th subject, so they're fully prepared for HAVO. Or they pick a subject that they can still catch up during the summer or something, or in another way. So that is something to discuss with the HAVO school. So like I said before, with the HAVO diploma, you can also move to the 5th year of VWO and then get your VWO diploma in the 6th year. So there's a lot of movement. So that also means that, especially in the higher grades of secondary school, there's an age difference of 1.5, 2 years, sometimes more. So some kids, they have repeated a year. Some others came from VMBO to HAVO to VWO. There's also some kids who first went to the newcomer class and then moved to regular school. So age is not important, and the university doesn't care about age at all. You just need to have the diploma. And then the last stream, VWO, so that's pre-research university education. It takes 6 years. And there's 2 branches of VWO, Atheneum and Gymnasium. And they both give equal access to research university. So also, if your child wants to become a doctor or a lawyer, I know in some countries you need to go to Gymnasium for those. Here you don't. You get a VWO diploma. You don't get a Gymnasium or an Atheneum diploma. So for children who want to become a doctor, or if they want to study Spanish, or if they want to become a Latin teacher, it could be handy to go to Gymnasium, but it's not a requirement. So that's also very important to know that. And what exactly the difference between Atheneum and Gymnasium is, we talk about later, but this is the most important for now. You get a VWO diploma, and that's equally good. After the 3rd year, the students have to choose the same profile as in HAVO, so between the 4. And they just have 1 extra year that they specialize in this profile. So the final phase for HAVO takes 2 years, and for VWO takes 3 years. So that's the main difference there. In VWO, they have to choose at least 8 exam subjects, so 1 more than HAVO. Another difference between HAVO and VWO is that in HAVO it's more applying the knowledge, so you learn something and you have to apply it. And VWO is more analytical. They ask you, okay, hey, you've studied A, now you interpret B and explain what will happen in case of C. So you have to analyze more, you have to think more through, combine different sources to give the answer. So it's more analytical because research university is more analytical than University of Applied Sciences. But they are all very good school options, just different. So what you can become after those secondary school studies, of course, there's many more professions, but this is just to give you an idea. So with an MBO diploma, you can become an assistant in a lot of different types, secretary, security officer, a lot of technician professions, woodworker, hairdresser, nurse, childminder. So a lot of different things, and they're qualified after the MBO, so they're well prepared for the job. They can move on right away. And especially in Amsterdam, there's a huge shortage of technical staff, childminders, a lot of other MBO graduates. So you have job security right away. And also they can ask much more money than they could before because of the shortage. So with HBOs, the University of Applied Sciences, you can become a teacher, accountant, manager, team leader, banker, architect, art director, journalist, and a lot more. You also see here engineer. So there's 2 different types of engineers. So you have ING and IR. And ING, that is HBO, and IR engineer, it's a research university. Also pilot, which is definitely university study in a lot of other countries. Here it's University of Applied Sciences because you have to apply the flying. It's also very common that, for example, in a hospital, you have nurses with the MBO diploma and nurses with the HBO diploma. The HBO nurses, they have usually more managerial functions. They are both a nurse, but then they have different additional subjects and qualifications. It's also common that people in their job, they take a lot of courses and they end up at a higher level. So it really depends on what they need. And what we call university, so abbreviation is WO, so scientific education. And then it's more the specialist, the expert, lawyer, psychologist, doctor, surgeon, and so on. So there's a lot of different types. Often in job ads, they just say HBO thinking level or working experience, and they don't specify which type you need. But that depends on the profession, of course. So if you want to become a doctor, then you really need to have your medicine degree. It's also good to know that from age 21, there's an option to take an entrance test for HBO and university. That's called Colloquium Doctum. And then if you pass this test, then you can study at one of those institutes. So even without all the diplomas, you can still get at university if you want to. But that's from 21. Then some schools offer Technasium, and some people think that's another stream besides VMBO, HAVO, and VWO, but that is not the case. Technasium, then we talk about an additional subject that's called O&O in Dutch, so research and design it stands for. So you do HAVO Technasium or VWO Technasium, and few schools, they also offer VMBO Technasium. So this is an extra subject on top of the regular curriculum. And what they do is they create solutions to everyday problems. So usually it's a company or a municipality or institution that presents a real problem that they have. And then they ask the Technasium students to come up with a solution. So first they have to do research into the problem. They have to interview people about this problem. Then they have to think of solutions, they have to brainstorm, they have to create things. So it's a lot of group work, a lot of creative thinking. Then once they have found a solution, they have to present it to the company that gave the assignment. And then if they approve it, then it will be carried out for real, in real life. So one example is at Metis Montessori, they also have Technasium department. And the problem was that they had trash cans, and sometimes they were over flooding, and other times someone came to empty them and then they were only half full. And that's a waste of time and resource, of course. So what they did was they developed a sensor, and when the trash had rised up to a certain level, then the sensor would give a sign to whoever was supposed to empty it. So then they didn't come too early and not too late. And that is a real problem that we can all experience. And they found a solution that have really helped society in their way. Usually Technasium lasts only for the first 3 years. And then you follow the regular HAVO or VWO diploma. Sometimes they offer an additional research subject that you can also take up in your exam package, but that really depends on the school. It's very good to know that all the final exams are the same, they're national. So it doesn't matter which school or where you are in the country, you take the same exam at the same time as everyone else. So there's no better or worse school. If they have VWO, then they have VWO, and they will make sure that as many students pass the exam. And the universities, like I said, they don't care which school a child has attended. I didn't get the impression that some of your children are considering Kopklas, but just in case, so you know it exists. So for children who are in group 8 and their Dutch level is not good enough yet to get high advice that would do justice to their academic level, they could go to Kopklas. And that is a very intensive year where they can upgrade their Dutch. So the aim of this year is to get a higher advice than they got in group 8. It's a small class of about 15 children who are all around the same age. So they have to be between 11 and 13. So sometimes they can also move after group 7, but that is very rare. The focus is on Dutch, but then they do a lot of additional things to really improve. That could be a good idea, but it takes a year. And after that, you start in the first year of secondary school. But in some cases, those kids, they would have gone to VMBO maybe, and then later on move to HAVO and then to VMBO. So that takes also time. So then after COP class, they can maybe go straight to VWO. So it really depends on their academic performance and the level of Dutch. There are only a few schools in Amsterdam that offer that COP class. So they are a bit spread out over the city. You can give your preference for location, but sometimes it can be that one is full and that they will place your child at the other location. The deadline is coming up very soon. So if you are interested, you really have to apply quickly. And it can only go through the primary school. So only the teacher of group 8 can apply on behalf of your child. The children will get priority for the regular secondary school after the COP class. So it's the same building, but you can also take part in the lottery and then go to another school if you want to. Maybe you've also heard of ISK. That is for newcomers who don't speak any Dutch yet. They cannot go to regular school right away. They first have to learn Dutch and also other subjects in Dutch before they can move to regular school. So that is a different solution entirely. So it really depends on the level of Dutch and how long they have been in the Netherlands before. There are a lot of differences between primary and secondary school, and you really have to be prepared for that. So even with our second son, I was still surprised. Well, I had already gone through this before. In group 8 of primary school, they are the youngest, and that gives a certain status and how the smaller kids look up to them. Well, that really changes in secondary school because suddenly they are the youngest and some kids are 18 or close to that. That makes a big difference. So some children, they're really overwhelmed by how big the other kids are. Prepare them as much as you can for this big change. This is also the age that they grow up fast. They will enter puberty, some children a bit earlier than others. So also in terms of behavior, they can change. Maybe they sleep in a lot. It's hard to get them out of bed to go to school. So all those things, you will encounter them. It's also the time that they get more and more independent. So they usually cycle by themselves to school. They will see friends after school, and they do a lot of things without you as parents. So you really have to make sure that your child knows what they can do and what they cannot do, where they can go and where they cannot go. Some children think it's a good idea to go to Kalverstraat to hang around there. I don't like that idea, but you really have to explain that to your child. What are the limits for you? What time they have to be home? It's pretty common to cycle for about 20 minutes, sometimes longer. Some children go by tram or metro, but usually they also have, especially when it's nice weather, they go to sports fields outside of the school for physical education, and then they usually have to cycle there. And it's also common that they have excursions or they're going to do homework at a friend's house. So having a bike at school is very handy, but it depends on your logistics as well, of course. Primary schools in Amsterdam are usually between 250 and 350 pupils. Most secondary schools are bigger, so the average is about, I would say, 900 or something. There are some smaller ones and some bigger ones. It's much more massive, so some children find that too overwhelming, and then it's maybe good to look for a smaller school. Also, the relationship and the communication with school changes a lot. So it's common that the classes have a mentor, and that is the first point of contact for the parents. Maybe you will not meet any of the subject teachers, or maybe a few during the 10-minute meetings that take place 2 or 3 times per year. But for the rest, you don't have much contact with school. Also, the other parents of your child's friends, the classmates, sometimes I have no idea who they are. So that's very different from primary school. They also have trips and camps, sometimes abroad in the third or fourth year usually, and that's all without parents. They have teachers, of course, to supervise them, but no parents anymore. It is very common for schools that in the first year they have a camp of a few days. They go somewhere in the Netherlands, and that's called the brugklaskamp. And that's only with the first year students to get to know each other better, to explain the dynamics of secondary school and how it all works. And that's why they do that in the beginning of the school year. And that really helps to become more familiar with the school. And then we already talked about it a bit. So they have a lot of different subjects. Most schools, they have books for each subject. So then that means a lot of books to carry around. A lot of schools have lockers. So if the books are really heavy, then they could put the afternoon books in the locker and then swap books during the break, and then only carry around the afternoon books and leave the rest in the locker. And it's also, a lot of planning. They have to check, what classes do I have tomorrow? Do I have the right books? Some things are on iPads or laptops. That also depends on the school, how they use devices. They have homework. So in primary school, sometimes they get some homework, also depends a bit on the school. But secondary school, it's usually a lot of homework. So it's common about 1.5 hours per day. But also that varies per school. There are also some schools where they have almost no homework, and that usually means they have longer hours at school and they do already a lot of their work at school. And then when they go home, then they are free. Can be nice, but it's harder for the parents then to understand what they're doing at school, really. They have subject teachers, so specialized teachers for every subject. Again, it depends on the school. So it's common that the teachers stay in their classroom and then the students, they move around, especially in the beginning, get a bit lost. Some other schools, they have a sort of homeroom and that the students stay in that classroom and then the teachers, they move. The children prefer the homeroom. The teachers usually prefer to have their own classroom where they can leave all the equipment that they need to teach and they don't need to carry around everything. Or the school has one wing for the first years and then the other floors are for the higher grades. So then you have to move from classroom to classroom, but the distance is not that far. So that is also something to ask how the layout of the building is. They have a timetable that can often change. So every day can be different. And then usually after every school vacation, they might change the timetable again. Depends a bit on the school. There will be in between hours. So when the teacher is sick or when something else has happened, then it can be that the class is cancelled. Unfortunately, we have a teacher shortage. There's not many substitute teachers. So your child will be free during school hours. And then it depends a bit on the school. Some schools, they say first year students, they cannot leave the school premises during school hours. And other schools, they say, whatever. So also discuss with your child what they can do when the class is cancelled. Don't be surprised they're home at 11 and leave again at 1 because they have a few more hours. That is how it works. You're not expected to be home when your child is home, but maybe you want to give them a key. There is a canteen at most secondary schools. You can buy food there, so it's not free. Usually it's no hot meals or maybe some snacks, or some schools have a healthy canteen with more healthy food. But it's also common that they go during the breaks to the supermarket or snack bar to buy their own lunch. So also here you have to talk with your child who pays for those snacks and how much and how often in the week, because that can also get out of hand if you don't make rules about it. Then a lot of schools, they have things in common. So the obligatory subjects, the government has established what they call core objectives. They are the basics for every school, for every year. Also the number of hours that they have to teach and the subjects. So those are fixed, but then the extras are all different. And most schools give grades, or some they don't give a number, but they say it's sufficient or more than sufficient, or you should try a bit harder. It's common that they give a report card 2 or 3 times per year, so with the grades for the tests and other work. And that is something that you should install on day one. There is a portal. Some schools use Magister or Som Today or Sermelo. And your child can see in this portal the homework, the timetable, the grades, a lot of additional information. And you as parents can also see all that. And this is also where you register when your child is sick or has to go to the dentist. So that all goes through these portals. And that's very important to have. There are some discussions that they want to limit the access of parents into the grades, because some parents are too much on top of that and they know the grade before the child. That's not really nice, I think. For example, I have the Magister app on my phone, but first I ask my son, did you already get your grade for your history test? And then I look at the Magister portal myself, so not before that. Then all schools ask for a voluntarily parental contribution. It's usually a bit higher compared to primary school, around €200 per year. Some schools ask a bit more. They use that for the extra things. So the education is free, the books are free, a lot is included, but some extra excursions or the locker and the school picture and all those things, they're extras. It is also common for schools that they have a mentor. The mentor is a subject teacher that also gives extra mentor class. During mentor class, they discuss about how is everyone doing, how are the dynamics in class, are there any issues? It's the first point of contact when something doesn't go well for your child. They also teach study skills and how to plan your work and how to do your homework and those kind of things. For some children, that's not enough. They just don't get it right away. So pay attention to that. Maybe your child needs additional help just to oversee everything. It is common for schools that they have school parties. For the younger years, that's usually at school. And for the older kids, they often rent a venue externally. And sometimes the fee is included in the parental contribution. Sometimes they ask extra money. It is voluntarily. So my older son, he cannot care less. So he doesn't go to those parties, but my younger one, he really likes it. So that's all fine. These are the subjects that every school has to teach in the lower grades. So usually that's the first 3 years, and that's called onderbouw in Dutch. And then the next 2 or 3 years is bovenbouw. So Dutch and English are obligatory for everyone. Then there's 2 additional foreign languages that they have to teach. Usually it's German and French. But schools are also allowed to swap either German or French for another language. So some schools, they pick Spanish, and very few schools, they offer other languages, so Italian or Arabic or Turkish. And there was a question about Turkish. I can send you a list. There's a few schools where you can take your exam in Turkish. That's for native speakers especially. They don't always get classes in that language. It's more self-study, but you can take your official exam. And then in gymnasium, they have additionally Latin and ancient Greek. So that is especially interesting for children who are interested in those ancient languages, in ancient cultures, mythology. But it is extra. So it means 2 extra subjects, more hours in school, more homework. That's not for everyone, and that's okay. There are some schools that offer both gymnasium and atheneum, and sometimes gymnasium is just Latin and Greek extra, but some other schools for atheneum, they have additional subjects that at gymnasium they don't teach. So for example, Hyperion, they have some options for debating and philosophers and logic thinkers or something. So that is an extra challenge for the atheneum students. So it really depends on the school how they arrange that. In the first 3 years, they all have to follow a history class and geography, social studies, citizenship, biology, physics, chemistry, economy, IT and computer science and technology. Some schools, they combine different subjects. So it's very common to combine physics and chemistry. And then it becomes what they call NASC, so natuurkunde, scheikunde combined, or history and geography, or there's some other combinations. But in the end, the objectives or the attainment targets, they prescribe what they all have to study. So how you name it, how you combine it, and which year you teach it, that doesn't really matter. So economy is usually introduced in the third year, but in the end, they all have to teach these subjects. And then also visual and fine art, drawing, music, drama, dance, and physical education. So that's all obligatory. Some schools offer extra, or instead of the basic art, they offer a lot of types of art, but that's all on top of the basic program. When your child goes to art profile school, they have all these subjects plus the extra art, but not instead of geography or history, because that is obligatory. And then after the third year, they have to choose this profile we discussed about earlier. Then there's a lot of differences between the schools. So you have a school hour that can be different from a clock hour, which maybe sounds a bit strange, but some schools, one school hour takes 45 minutes, or 50 or 60 or 70. Sometimes they have a block hour, so double hour, so then 2 hours of the same class, so twice 45 minutes, for example. There are a few schools that have the whole morning, they do one subject or one project or one theme, and then the afternoon another one. So that's a day part. So it really depends on the school, how they structure the day. A lot of schools, they make a combination between laptop or iPad and books, but some schools are very book heavy and other schools are more device heavy. So that's also something you need to inquire about. And then some schools, they combine a lot of subjects, and others, they have just single subject and then time is up, other subjects. So it's more clear, but sometimes it's nicer for the children to have a project or a bigger theme that they can put everything in context. A lot of schools, they have a few hours per week that the children can decide themselves what they want to do. They have to sign up for a course, so that means they can do some additional classes, something they are interested in, school choir or robotics, for example. Or they can say, well, I didn't really get the explanation of math. Maybe I'll sit in at another math class taught by a different teacher. Maybe I understand it better. So they can decide what they want to do, but they have to do something and they have to sign in. So the teachers can check there where they're supposed to be. And every school calls this a bit in a different way. So keuzewerktijd is a common term for that, but the Dalton schools call it Dalton hour, or Montessori schools call it M hour. It's the same thing, basically. So a few hours per week where they can decide themselves what to do. Then, so English is always obligatory subject up to the final exams for everyone. But some schools offer an additional option to do qualification or a certificate for English. That can be fast lane English or Cambridge English, or sometimes IB English, but then only for the subject of English. And also for French and German, they have Goethe and Delft. So that's an additional certificate on top of the classes in that language. The facilities can also be very different. Also the school buildings and all the extras that they offer. So they all have to offer PE classes, but some schools, they have a big gym hall in the school, and others you have to go to different school or a sports hall for a gym class. So the basics are the same for every school, but some have a bit nicer stuff or more modern or a lot of extra things. The same applies for the after school programs. So some schools, they have no after school program, and others, they have a lot of different classes that you can sign up for, orchestras, choirs, different languages. So that's all optional. Sometimes you have to pay extra for that. but not much usually. And like in primary school, most students, they go to their own sports club and music school, and they just go to the same place they are used to go. Population can be very different. A lot of children go to school in the same neighborhood, so a lot of schools are the reflection of that neighborhood, but you don't get priority for distance like the case is with primary schools. So there's also a lot of kids who cycle through the whole city to go to another school. And some schools are religious, although most of them don't really practice religion anymore. Some schools, they were built more than 100 years ago. And at that time, religion was very important in the Netherlands, but not anymore. But always ask what they do in terms of religion and then see if that works for you or not. There's also some schools that have a philosophy like Montessori, Waldorf, Jenaplan, not so much anymore, but Dalton is pretty common. You don't get priority anymore, and they don't expect that the child has experience with that type of education. So they will start by explaining what that philosophy means and what the children have to do. So what's also good to check is the number of students per level. So it can be that they offer, for example, VMBO and HAVO and VWO, but then VMBO department is very large and VWO, they only have one class. That's not really nice, I think. Depends, but personally, I think it's nicer when there's multiple classes of the same year and the same level. Also to exchange things, and for the teachers, it's nicer so they can discuss about things. So also look at that. And the special needs support. Yeah, all schools, they have to offer the basic special needs support, but some schools have more experience with, for example, dyslexia or children who are not native Dutch speakers or autism. So always ask if your child needs extra support, if they can provide it and how, and if they have prior experience or if you have to figure out everything yourself. So that's important to know that in advance. The size of the school is also very different. Calland Lyceum is the biggest school of Amsterdam. Last year they had 1,650 students. That's really big. They also have everything. They have VMBO-t, HAVO, VWO, they have Technasium and top sport class. So my older son, he attended 2 years at top sport class of Calland Lyceum, but he couldn't stay. Long story, but he switched to another school after those 2 years. It is a big school, but the first year and the second year students, they have their own entrance, they have their own canteen and their own wings of the building where they follow their classes. And what I really like is that at the end of the school year, they open the wall of the canteen. And then it turns out that the canteen of the higher grade students is attached to their small canteen so they can see the rest of the school and gradually get used to the bigger school. So advantages of a bigger school are that they usually have more facilities, also after school options. They have more specialized teachers in special needs, or they've done more research in their subject or something like that. They often also have special classes, additional things that they can offer. So it's more about extras that they can offer, and maybe they have more connections or networks. Advantages of smaller schools is usually that they're more personal. Everyone knows everyone else. It's easier to find your way. You don't really get lost in the building. Sometimes they have smaller classes, but that's not always the case, because if a small school is very popular, then the classes will be full. So that is something you have to ask. Harder is the smallest school of Amsterdam. That's Orthodox Jewish school, and the whole school is only 33 students. So that's a very big contrast with Calland. Where your child fits best is a very personal decision. What you need to look for in schools, so look at the levels they offer. If you think that your child may be able to grow to a higher level, or maybe if it's not certain that your child will manage a specific level, then it's nice to have different levels at the school, especially combined brugklas. So with different levels in the first year can be an advantage. Duration of the brugklas, so it can be from 1 to 3 years. The size of the school, the building. And then it's very important what your child chooses, because they have to go to school. So where do they get a good feel? Where can they picture themselves walking around for the coming 4 or 5 years or 6 years? Some schools are very traditional, others are brand new. Do you want a more established school or a school that's more experimenting with things, modern teaching approach? Do you want a specific philosophy or religion? Do you want additional subjects or a certain profile? Do you find the facilities important? The length of school hours. Some children, they find more time better because then they can usually also work a bit on their homework. And others, they are bored when a lesson takes longer than 1 hour. Do they have a preference for books or devices or mix? What kind of population do you feel comfortable with? And also check the inspection reports, because they look at a lot of different things to see if they think it's a good school or not. Most schools, they score well for the inspection, and if they don't, then they get extra support. And if they really score badly, they risk to be closed. So this is very serious. On the websites, I listed below 3 schoolkeuze, schoolwijs en school op de kaart. You can find a lot of additional information about the schools, but your personal decision is very important as well. So this is just supporting your decision. Then a lot of schools, they are part of a corporation or a network, or they have certain certificates. So UNESCO schools, they talk a lot about citizenship, human rights, peace. They have a lot of intercultural exchange, sustainability. That can be nice. It's extra. Beta partners, they do a lot of science things. They have sometimes science tournaments against other schools. So there's a lot of options. For some, this is more marketing than that they put anything in practice, really. Now, if we look at Amsterdam specifically, so most of the schools are in Amsterdam South. In Centrum, there's only a few. Depending on where you live, you might have to list schools that are further away from your house. And remember, you don't get priority, so you can look in the whole city and also check the public transport and see if you can make it work. In total, there's 88 schools. So if a school has 2 buildings, and it counts both buildings. If you look at the schools per level, there's also a lot of choice here. Some schools, they only offer 1 level, and others combine multiple levels. So there's a lot of options. This adds up more than the numbers you saw before because of the many schools that combine different levels. Then some schools, they follow a specific educational philosophy or concept. So there's some Montessori, Dalton, Waldorf schools. Then one school, Lumion, is Kunskapsskolan. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. It is a Swedish word that's a lot about personal learning, and they have all different program and a coach that follows up with the program. It's a lot with iPads, so you really have to choose that. Agora, they combine all the different levels in the first 3 years, and they talk a lot about things that happened in society. And the idea is that the students are asking questions and that the teachers then answer those questions and then add a lot of things from their subject knowledge. And then the children work on projects. And so it's not really fixed what they're going to learn. In the end, they have the same core objectives, but much more freedom how and when to learn those things. So that's really something that has to suit you or not. Then the Finse school is based on the Finnish school system. They have a lot of art focus, and they also combine the first 3 years VMBO-t, HAVO and VWO in the same class. And then you have 2 schools that have the IB diploma program, but that's only in the 5th and 6th year. That's some parents think this is an international school. That's not. So it's Denise and Alaska. They both belong to the Esprit school board. So at Denise, the first 3 years, they put VMBO, HAVO and VWO together. And then about 1/3 of the classes are taught in English. And then the students have to choose, and also based on their performance, if they do VMBO-t or HAVO, and that's all in Dutch, or IB diploma program, and that's all in English. So they don't have the Dutch VWO. So that's something to take into consideration as well. Alaska has both IB diploma program and VWO. So there you have more choice in that respect. But they don't teach much in English beforehand. So those are the different concepts in Amsterdam. So there are 5 schools that offer only gymnasium. So in Dutch that's called categoraal gymnasium. There are Barleus, Cygnus, Vossius, Ignatius and the fourth gymnasium. If you don't like Latin or ancient Greek, or when you're not good at it, you have to leave the school. So that you really have to be sure of your case in this situation. Barleus and Vossius and Ignatius, they are pretty old gymnasium schools. They've been around for a long time. Cygnus and the fourth gymnasium, they are more modern, they are newer. They also have a different population. So in the end, they're all gymnasium schools, but there's a different feel that you get from them. And then there are 10 other schools where you can also follow gymnasium, but alongside other levels. So that can have an advantage. If you then want to drop to Atheneum, you don't need to leave the school. Then there are more and more schools that combine 3 levels in the first year. So between brackets, I put how many years, so either 2 or 3 years. This list is growing. So then the streaming will be postponed and they will look at how a child performs. Often they approach this in different ways. It can be that the student gets a HAVO grade and then a VWO grade, and then at the end of the bridge class period they see, okay, based on these grades your level is more HAVO or VWO. But they can have different ways to decide which next level is best for them. There's some schools, they have 2 levels. So previous slide was 3 levels in first 1 to 3 years. And this is schools that have 2 levels for 2 or 3 years. Usually that is either VMBO-t and HAVO or HAVO and VWO together, but that depends on the school, so you have to check that. Then some schools have a special profile. So on the lottery list, you will have to pick the profile if the school offers that. I want to add something about TTO, so that stands for bilingual secondary education. For a lot of international parents, that sounds very attractive, but it means the first 3 years, a lot of classes are taught in English, but after the 3rd year, they switch to almost fully Dutch to prepare for the Dutch exam. So the exams are the same as all the other schools. So if you don't speak Dutch at home and your child only gets part of the time taught in Dutch at school, where do they get the rest of their exposure from? And that is something you really have to be aware of and make sure that your child learns the terminology, because in the 4th year, they don't only get new materials, but also in a different language that they studied the first 3 years in. So even for some native Dutch speakers, that is a big challenge. So I'm not saying you shouldn't choose TTO, but be aware of this challenge and prepare very well for that. So there's a lot of international kids who fail in the 4th year for this reason. So Technasium, we already talked about. Some schools have a sports profile. So Galland is the only school that has official sport status. And then some other schools, they have a sports class. How they have designed a sports class varies per school. Some schools have a culture profile. So next to the basic art classes, they do extra stuff. Then Gerrit van der Veen, for example, they also have a class for children who want to become a professional dancer or musician. So that's a separate class that you have to do audition for. There's no school for gifted students, but some schools, they have a special program for gifted students. This is something that's really developing, and you really have to ask the school specifically. It also depends, because one gifted child has different needs than another child. There was a webinar organized by the Samenwerkingsverband, so the umbrella organization of school boards, and they recommended these schools for extra support for gifted students, but always check yourself if that works for you. And then there is Metis Montessori, and they have a special class for children who are on the spectrum. And that's a small class with a limit number of changes, and so very contained, but that's only for the first 2 or 3 years, but so not for the whole duration of the school, but it definitely helps for some children. Then there are some schools where you have to do an intake for, because they have a special profile for art or culture or culinary, hospitality, media. you really have to check the website of the schools, because the intake takes place about now. So you don't have much time if your child is interested in it. The intake includes a portfolio or proof of interest or something to show that they're really very interested in this type of education. And if you don't do the intake, the school will not appear on the lottery list. So without the intake for IFCO, you cannot choose for IFCO as a school because it's obligatory. Then there's also a new tech school, and there they combine a lot of different schools that offer the tech program, and it's all in one place. I went there a few months ago. It's really cool. They have all kinds of tech, and it's really needed, especially for Amsterdam. So this was what I wanted to present. There were some questions. I'll go through them very briefly. So for twins, there's no priority. So for each kid, you have to apply separately in the lottery, and it is very likely they will end up at different schools. If you really want them to go to the same school, then you should pick a school that is not very popular, that has most likely a place for both kids. In very special cases, parents can apply for the hardship clause. The deadline is tomorrow or the day after. That's only when the child, for medical or psychological reasons, really needs to go to one specific school. You can build a case and ask for a place there, and then you don't need to take part in the lottery. But this is really only for the very major reasons. So only few kids can apply in this way. When you live in Amstelveen, you have to choose either take part in the Amstelveen lottery or Amsterdam. Previously you could do both, but that's not possible anymore with the central application period. There are some schools in Amsterdam that are close to Amstelveen, but some are very far away, and you have to list 9 for HAVO and VMBO. So if that's a good idea, that's up to you. But you can. Then homework support. Some schools, they provide internal homework support. In some cases, you have to pay extra for that. For other schools, it's free. It's also common that parents hire an external tutor who comes to their home or online to help the children with homework. A lot of children don't need any support, or maybe only in the beginning to get them started. So it is possible, but you have to arrange that yourself in most cases. Some of you asked if it's possible to change schools after the first year. You can, but it's very difficult. We went through that with my older son last year. You have to apply for multiple schools from March or so. Every school has a different procedure. And only the very last week of the school year, they know how many children have to repeat the year, who will move house. And only then they can say if there is a place. It's very nerve-wracking, not transparent at all. And you risk there's no place anywhere where you applied. And then you have to call all the schools that still have a place or stay at the previous school. So don't say goodbye yet. It's not fun. It did work out well in the end for us, but I can still feel the stress from that. But so the answer is yes, you can. Here I have a lot of additional information, so you can click on the link in the presentation that I will send to you. And so some articles I wrote myself, and then a lot of other sources. You should have received the keuzegids, if your child is in group 8, that is. And that contains a lot of information about each school separately, and also about the procedure. And you can also find this information online. It's the same content. So there's a lot of information. Digest everything and then make the right choice. I'll now go back to the chat, see if anything changed there. Does anyone have a question? Okay, I don't see any questions. No. Okay, then I'll close here. And like I said, if you have a question later, then you can send me an email or reply to the information I will send to you later. Is that okay? Thank you for joining, and good luck. I'll cross my fingers, and I really hope that your child will get the #1 school, and that you're all very happy with that. Good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.